2 days before our family recipe book went to the printer, Aunt Denise sent me the final proof. 5 recipes I had spent months testing were back to Grandma June's old wording. Enough milk, a little flour, bake until ready. Denise said it sounded more authentic. I told her I wasn't rebuilding those pages again. That evening, 2 cousins tried the dumplings. One got paste, the other watched hers dissolve in the broth. Denise called me. Denise did not start with an apology. She said, "Okay, so the dumplings are a problem." I had to put my phone down for a second because I laughed, and then I felt bad almost immediately. My cousin Erin had texted a picture of her batch. The dough was so stiff the spoon was standing upright in it. Denise had also gotten a short video from another cousin. Hers had gone the opposite direction. Half the dumplings were breaking apart as she stirred the broth. I said, "The tested version is still in the shared folder." "I know," Denise said. "But I don't want to put that whole version back." That was the problem. She wanted Grandma's wording because it sounded like grandma, which I actually understood. The tested version said things like how much flour to start with, how thick to roll the dough, and what the dough should feel like before cutting it. Grandma's card said, basically, flour, enough milk, 1 egg, salt. Denise said 3 older relatives had looked at the proof and told her some of the typed pages did not sound like June anymore. I could hear how much that bothered her. She had built the whole book around family photographs, handwritten notes, and little comments people remembered hearing in the kitchen. To her, a recipe that read like a store-bought cookbook missed part of the point. I did not think she was completely wrong. A few of my versions were dry. Useful but dry. Denise wanted something in between. "Can you just add the measurements back into the wording that's there?" she asked. I said, "Not tonight." She got quiet. Then she said, "It's 5 recipes." That irritated me more than it should have. Then why did we spend months testing them? I said it too sharply. Denise had done a ridiculous amount of work on the book. She had collected old photographs from 3 different branches of the family, called relatives who still mailed things instead of emailing them, organized the page order, fixed names under pictures, dealt with the printer, and answered everybody's contradictory opinions about fonts and paper. She was not lazy. She was not trying to steal anything from me. She had just decided, very late, that the recipes looked wrong to her. About 3 years earlier, I had started cooking with Grandma June on Sunday afternoons because I wanted to learn a few dishes before she stopped making them as often. That turned into me writing things down. Grandma did not measure the way I did. The first time I asked how much milk went into dumplings, she said, "Enough." I asked what enough looked like. She said, "You'll see." That was not especially useful to someone who was not standing beside her. So I started putting her bowl on a kitchen scale before and after she added things. If she scooped flour with the same old coffee cup, I measured what that cup actually held. If she said a little handful, I had her drop the handful into a bowl before it went into the recipe. Grandma thought this was funny. She also forgot I was doing it and would dump something in while my back was turned. There were other little traps. Her old oven ran cool, so one cake that had always been done at 400 browned too fast when we tried the same instruction in my oven. One handwritten bread recipe referred to a yeast packet from years ago. Another called for a number 2 can, which meant something to Grandma and almost nothing to me. The point was never to improve her food. I was trying to figure out what she already did without thinking about it. When Denise started the cookbook, she asked if she could use the versions I had been testing. I said yes. We had a shared folder with scans of the original cards and separate typed versions that had been cooked by at least 2 people besides Grandma. Denise credited me for testing them. That part was never an issue. For most of the project, we actually worked well together. The disagreement started when the first full proof came back. Denise called me and said some pages sounded too much like a cookbook you would buy at a store. I knew what she meant. Grandma never said, "Add 2 tablespoons of milk as needed." She said, "Loosen it up." I told Denise I was fine with putting some of Grandma's language back around the measurements. What I did not realize was that she meant taking a few recipes almost all the way back to the old cards. She thought people in the family would understand. The dumplings answered that question pretty fast. After our call, Denise sent me a message with the 5 recipes and wrote, "Can you just fill in the missing parts?" I opened the list even though I had already said no. That was my mistake. I knew most of the answers. I could probably have cleaned up 2 of the recipes without getting out of my chair. The other 3 were not that simple. Grandma's yeast rolls used an old packet size, and the amount on her card did not line up neatly with what most grocery stores sell now. We had already tested a modern version. The caramel cake was worse. Grandma's notes for the icing said to cook it until it was right. We had learned during testing that melted butter versus softened butter changed the texture, and the timing mattered more than anybody remembered. The pickled beans had no vinegar amount at all. And the dumplings were not just a missing number. 2 people could use the same amount of flour and milk and still get different results depending on how hard they worked the dough and how thick they rolled it. I sat there looking at the files thinking, I could do this. Grandma was excited about the book. The printer deadline was close. Denise was stressed. I already had most of the information, and I knew exactly what would happen if I opened a blank document. I would tell myself I was only fixing the dumplings, then I would notice the roll instructions needed a different sentence. Then I would start comparing caramel notes, and suddenly it would be midnight, and I would have 5 new recipes to test. That was the part Denise kept calling, filling in the missing pieces. It was not typing in 5 numbers, it was making a 3rd version of work we had already finished. It would have been easier, in a way, to spend the evening fixing everything and be annoyed about it later. Then I looked at the folder again. The finished versions were already there. Denise had a solution. She just did not like how it looked on the page. I called her back. I said, "If you want recipes we know work, restore the tested files." She said, "I don't want to lose Grandma's voice." I get that, so help me keep both. That was where I almost gave in. Instead I said, "Not before printing. That is another round of work. I'm not doing 5 new versions because you changed the 5 we already finished." She sighed and said, "I think you're making this more rigid than it needs to be." I said, "Maybe." But the versions are there. The call ended awkwardly. For the next day or so, Denise tried to solve the problem without me, and honestly, some of it worked. My Aunt Carol, who had originally submitted the pickled bean card, remembered that her mother always used the same jar for the vinegar. She still had one in a cabinet and measured it. The corn pudding got fixed after 2 relatives compared notes and figured out what size the older recipe had meant. That one did not need me at all. The rolls were less cooperative. One batch barely rose. Another was fine, except the person making them had added extra yeast because she did not trust the old instruction, which sort of defeated the point of testing the old instruction. The dumplings were even more ridiculous. Erin added milk slowly because that was how Grandma had shown her once, and hers came out decent. My uncle poured in what he thought enough, meant all at once, then added flour until the dough stopped sticking. His dumplings were heavy enough that Grandma called them little doorstops. The caramel icing came out grainy twice. Denise sent pictures. I answered normal questions when I could. Yes, Grandma usually used salted butter. No, I did not remember her ever chilling the dumpling dough. Yes, the corn pudding pan in my notes was the same size Grandma used. But when Denise asked me to give her the corrected caramel timing over the phone, I told her it was already written in the tested version. She said, "You know the answer." "I do. You're making me go find it. It's in a folder you have open." She hung up on me. I was mad for about 20 minutes. Then I started feeling guilty again. That evening, I went to Grandma's house because I had promised to bring her groceries. Denise was there with a container of the 2nd caramel cake. Grandma tasted the icing and made a face. "Sugar got away from you," she said. Denise said, "How long do you cook yours?" Grandma shrugged. "Till it behaves." I laughed again. Denise did too, although hers was more tired. Then Grandma looked at both of us and said, "Why are you asking me like I wrote a science book?" She liked the old cards. She also had no idea why anyone expected those cards to tell a stranger exactly what to do. While we put groceries away, Denise said she still thought the tested pages looked too formal. I told her I agreed with her about some of them. That surprised her. I said, "The rolls page sounds like an appliance manual. I would change it if we had another week." So change it now. No, that made Grandma laugh from the living room. Denise rolled her eyes, but the conversation was less hostile after that. The next morning, she made the choices she had been avoiding. She restored the tested versions of the dumplings, rolls, and caramel cake. To make them fit the design, she cut one small photograph and tightened two captions herself. She kept the corn pudding closer to the original wording because the family tests had worked once they clarified the can size. For the pickled beans, she added the vinegar amount Aunt Carol had measured and left the rest mostly in the old style, with a note that the seasoning amounts were approximate. That was not the exact solution I would have chosen. It was also her book project, and it was reasonable. She sent me the revised proof and asked one question. Do you see anything that will make somebody poison themselves? I said, that is a much lower standard than we started with. She said, please answer the question. I read the 5 pages. They look fine. The books went to print. When the boxes arrived a few weeks later, Denise brought them to Grandma's house before a Sunday dinner. The book looked good. Better than I expected, actually. Denise had used a faded picture of Grandma rolling dough for the section divider. There were notes from relatives I had never seen. One page had my grandfather's handwriting in the margin next to a pie recipe, telling Grandma she had forgotten the salt. Grandma flipped through it and complained that one photograph made her arms look big. Then she found the dumplings. She read the tested instructions and said, I don't do all that. I said, you absolutely do. She said, not on purpose. That was probably true. People were mostly interested in finding their own mothers' and grandmothers' recipes. A few of the recipes stayed vague because that was how the family wanted them preserved. Some were precise enough that a cousin who had never watched Grandma cook could make them. Both kinds ended up in the same book. Denise and I were still a little stiff with each other afterward. We did not suddenly become perfect collaborators. A couple of months later, my cousin Erin texted the family group asking for Grandma's yeast rolls because she wanted to make them for a potluck. Denise replied before I did. She attached a photo of Grandma's original card and the tested file. Then she wrote, the first one is Grandma's. Use the second one if you're actually making them. I stared at that message longer than necessary. I almost sent something smug. I really did. Instead, I reacted with a thumbs up and went back to work. That is pretty much how Denise handles the recipes now. When somebody asks for an old one, she usually asks one question first. Do you want the card, or are you cooking?